Welcome, everyone. Good evening. It is Danny Dhaiphong, your host for another live stream. We have a great show today. We have so much to cover from what isn't in the news as much, what's happening in West Asia. There have been pretty big, huge developments there that we're going to cover. We will also talk about, of course, what's going on with the Ukraine conflict, and we will round it out with discussion on what we can expect from the Trump administration as we see the cabinet picks rolled out, from Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence, Marco Rubio as State Department head. But without further ado, let me introduce my guest. It is former UN Weapons Inspector and U.S. Marine Corps Intelligence Officer, friend of the show, journalist, author, and so much more. It is Scott Ritter. Scott, thanks for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Everyone, be sure to go to the video description. You can find Scott Ritter's website there where you can support all of his work. Do like the stream as you come on. That helps boost the stream in the YouTube algorithm. And of course, go to the video description for all the places you can support both Scott's work and my own. So, Scott, let us begin because, of course, there's a lot of U.S. election chatter. Post-U.S. election, Trump is rolling out his cabinet in quick order. But I wanted to begin actually with a story that might not be getting a lot of attention, but I think is very important. And that is what happened in the last 24 hours in West Asia. We've seen Hezbollah, after Israel announced that it was going to expand its ground operation, has been absolutely beating Israeli forces back. They've hit through drone strike Israel's Ministry of Defense. They've also, in southern Lebanon, in just 24 hours alone, they have taken out upwards of 10 IDF troops inside of a residential building that was booby-trapped. Now, all of this is coming as we're waiting Iran's strike, and we're also seeing that Hezbollah is not defeated. This was the rhetoric that we've been hearing from the Israeli side as they seek to talk about negotiations. So, Scott, what do you make of these recent developments that are taking place right now in West Asia vis-a-vis Hezbollah?
Well, I mean, I've said from the very beginning of this that Hezbollah has been preparing for this kind of conflict with Israel since 2006, when the last direct conflict between, or large-scale conflict between Hezbollah and Israel took place for 18 years, brain math. Hezbollah has been anticipating what Israel would do. They've done what is known as intelligence preparation of the battlefield. They've looked at the terrain. They can predict, avenues of approach, terrain that Israel can advance on, terrain that is defensible, where they need to be to fire their mortars to hit a specific target, pre-targeting everything. So Israel's literally walking into an ambush. Every meter they advance further into southern Lebanon, it's 1 meter deeper into an ambush that has been prepared for 18 years by Hezbollah. Israel made a lot of talk about the damage that they've done to Hezbollah, and they have done damage. But again, Hezbollah is a professional organization that knows very well what Israel's capabilities are. Nothing Israel did. I guess the pager attack took them by surprise, but nothing Israel is doing now in terms of bombing took Hezbollah by surprise. Hezbollah knew that Israel would attack with their, take advantage of their supremacy in the air to drop bombs. And Hezbollah has hardened its targets. What we see Hezbollah doing now is they've reconstituted their mid to senior level leadership. Their lower ranks, the fighting ranks, are intact, and we see Hezbollah doing what they've always done, managing escalation. Rather than Israel having destroyed the totality of Hezbollah's ballistic missile capability, which the IDF wanted people to believe, we see Hezbollah every day rolling out new capabilities that Israel can't defend against. And this is just part and parcel of the reality that Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah. And if this war continues, we may see Hezbollah actually achieve the strategic defeat of Israel. And in 2006, Hezbollah won by surviving. Israel said that their goal was to defeat Hezbollah, and they failed to defeat Hezbollah. Therefore, Hezbollah, by default, won. This time around, not only is Israel not defeating Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is defeating Israel. That is, that Israel is being defeated tactically, operationally, and strategically by Hezbollah. This is a completely different outcome, and Israel has to be shocked by this because they've delivered the best shot they could deliver against Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is not phased. Hezbollah is still standing. Hezbollah is strong and getting stronger every day.
Yeah, and Hezbollah announced that they are ready for an expanded ground operation that Israel is saying that they're ready to conduct. But throughout this whole time, right around the time that Iran struck Israel, the beginning of October, Israel has been engaged in this ground operation. And according to Hezbollah, they have not been able to occupy or maintain or keep any village. And I think that the strike today really demonstrates just how perilous the situation is for Israel. And so I'm curious, Scott, Iran is patiently waiting, not making any moves right now, but it has said quite openly that not only is Hezbollah alive, but it is fighting back hard. What do you make of what's to come as Donald Trump is going to take office in a few months? What do you see as the trajectory with regard to Israel as it struggles mightily against Hezbollah?
Well, I think the Iranians are capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. And what I mean by that is that they can assess the reality of the Israeli struggle with Hezbollah separately from the new reality of President-elect Donald Trump, that the two aren't necessarily linked. I believe that the Iranians are prepared to engage in constructive dialogue with the new Trump administration if the Trump administration is interested in such a dialogue. Based upon some of the appointments that Donald Trump has made, the nominations for certain national security posts, it's clearly that it's staffed with overwhelming numbers of pro-Israel, anti-Iranian personalities. But Donald Trump has said he's not looking for a war with Iran. He has said that his posture is peace through strength. And so there's a chance that he's just posturing to appear to have a strong face, but that he will work with Iran to achieve an end to this cycle of violence that doesn't require escalation. One must always hold out hope for this. And I think the Iranians would be wise to keep the door open for, Trump or a Trump delegate to come in and talk to them. But the fact of the matter is, Israel has articulated very aggressive intent towards Iran, and the Iranians would be fools not to be prepared to respond to that either proactively or reactively. Right now, Iran, I believe, is prepared to deliver a massive strike against Israel that would be debilitating, absolutely devastating for Israel. But you have to ask the question, why? Why would Iran do that? Hezbollah has the upper hand right now. Hezbollah has achieved operational dominance over Israel in southern Lebanon. There's no reason for Iran to come in and weigh in on this aspect of the fight. Hezbollah is winning, and Hezbollah's victory, again, is a managed escalation conflict that keeps the attention where everybody that is in opposition to Israel agrees it needs to be, on Gaza, on Hamas, on the struggle for an independent Palestine. The last thing the Free Palestine cause needs is a massive regional conflict between Iran, Israel, and the United States that it destabilizes the global economy and shifts attention decisively away from the creation of a Palestinian state towards a larger global problem that is energy security and the need to bring that conflict to an end. So, the Iranians have always said that, they're supporting the Palestinian people, they're supporting Hamas. And right now, I think the strategic understanding is the best way to support Hamas in Palestine is by not attacking Israel. And I think that's the direction Iran appears to be leaning at this point in time.
Yeah, and at the moment, Israel appears to be struggling quite mightily with Hezbollah alone. Talk about this context because you have Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu really throwing out a lot of bluster, saying that they're going to expand operations on the ground and they're going to continue to maintain this bombing campaign, which has been absolutely devastating for the Lebanese people. Yet, it appears that Hezbollah is just being given more opportunities to show their strength. So I'm curious, Scott, if you could talk about this context, like how does this happen, given the fact we are presented with in the Western media, we get very little attention to anything but very small reports about the devastation happening in Lebanon. But from the outside looking in, a lot of people might look at this as Israel is causing a lot of devastation, wreaking a lot of havoc. How is it then that the Lebanese resistance is able to maintain and even up the ante with its own response and fight back?
Well, first of all, again, we have to acknowledge that what Israel is doing in southern Lebanon and what Israel is doing in Gaza is not something new. It's a continuation of previously articulated policies, the Dhaiphong doctrine, literally the southern suburb of Beirut that's being obliterated today by Israel. This policy is a policy of collective punishment that Israel began in 2006 and has expanded upon since then. And they are applying it in Gaza with horrific force. This is background noise by this time. I mean, the world has unfortunately become numb to the images of the dead women and children, the dead civilians, the innocents that are being slaughtered on a daily basis by Israel. It's just not shocking as it once was because people are just numb to it. But then we have the case of, Hezbollah's continued resistance. Anybody who has studied Hezbollah, anybody who has studied, how Nasrallah prepared for this, understands that this was always going to be the case, that Israel was never going to defeat Hezbollah. And it's playing out as we speak. But I think the most important thing is the context of all this. We're speaking as if Israel is seeking policies that are linked to the legitimate national security of Israel. This is wrong. Everything Israel does today is linked to the political survival of Benjamin Netanyahu. There's a story that's out there right now. I don't know. Do you follow Seymour Hersh's Substack?
I do, but I have not seen this one.
Well, most recently, he published an article either early today or late yesterday, fascinating article about what Bibi Netanyahu has been doing. And Bibi Netanyahu is in a lot of trouble, a lot of legal trouble right now, because if you remember, he did that briefing a little while ago where he talked about the hostages, and he said that Hamas was never serious about releasing the hostages, that Hamas sabotaged everything. And he put a document up there. The first thing is, by exposing this document, he exposed what Seymour Hersh has said is the single most highly classified document in Israel's possession. It's a document they captured early on during the Gaza operation that details Hamas's strategic intent regarding October 7th. But one of the things that Netanyahu was saying about this document is that it shows that that Hamas was never serious about releasing the hostages, because this document says that Sinwar was going to flee to Egypt with his family and the hostages and take them onwards to Iran. And this is what Netanyahu was talking about. So first of all, he revealed the existence of this extraordinarily classified document, which is a violation of the law. So he's in trouble for that. But he's also in trouble because he lied, because the document doesn't say that. The next 2 pages, which Netanyahu didn't talk about, it's a 12-page document apparently. The next 2 pages show that this was something suggested to Sinwar, but that Sinwar rejected it out of hand, that Sinwar was going to stay there, that Sinwar was actively looking for a deal with Israel that would trade return of the hostages for a ceasefire, that it wasn't Hamas that sabotaged this, it was Benjamin Netanyahu. So now there's a judge that has signed off on, investigations into Netanyahu's lying. And it gets worse than that. How did Netanyahu gain access to this document? Who went into this secure space and retrieved the document in total violation of the law? If you remember, Sandy Berger went into the National Archives at one point in time to retrieve a document that put the Clinton administration in a bad light, and he put those documents in his underwear and tried to smuggle them out. And he got in a lot of trouble for that. Well, this is what we're talking about here, a total violation of security protocols, etc. But this underscores the reality that Netanyahu isn't doing anything for Israel or the Israeli people. He's doing everything to further his political legacy, up to including stealing classified information, illegally presenting it to the Israeli population, and lying about the true meaning of these documents to disguise the fact that he is the one who undermined, that he's the one that made the decision. We are not going into a deal to release the hostages. And this will only further, fracture Israeli society. This is one of the things that I don't think the West is picking up on. Let's put it this way. If Iran was as fractured as Israel's society is, where you had the Iranian military marching in the street, talking about a coup d'etat against the Iranian president and the supreme leader, where you had the parliament in open fighting against one another, the president plotting against the prime minister, et cetera, people would say Iran's on the verge of collapse. That would be the headline news everywhere. Well, that's all happening in Israel, and nobody's talking about it. Everybody's acting as if Israel is a stable democracy. Israel is not a stable democracy. Israel is a military dictatorship that is collapsing from within. And there's a whole bunch of deep fractures and fissures that are going to be, further exacerbated by these events, including the fact that Netanyahu is under a new criminal investigation for some very serious crimes.
Scott, but given this reality, though, what's so interesting, and I like your comment on this, is that it seems the more that Netanyahu and that the Israeli regime attempts to legitimize itself through this just absolutely unhinged aggression in Lebanon, trying to take on Hezbollah, trying to confront Iran. I've heard you talk about the United States having the capacity to come in and create havoc in Iran should Israel need that assistance. Of course, you've also mentioned in other programs and on this program just how much of an impact that would have on the world. All of this is to say, though, Scott, isn't this is this kind of sowing the seeds, like fulfilling the prophecy, the attempts to re-legitimize through trying to confront Hezbollah, through expanding all of these operations everywhere and trying to take on Iran? Doesn't this just sow the seeds for the collapse that Netanyahu appears to be trying to avoid?
What's interesting is that Israel in 2022 and 2023 conducted military exercises, large-scale military exercises. I think the one in 2023 was called Operation Chariots of Fire. There was a stress test of the Israeli Defense Forces' ability to defend Israel against attacks from all of its enemies at the same time. Now, the irony here is that Israel never considered that in their thinking that the the attacks that would come would be triggered by an attack by Hamas that would inflict serious harm on Israel and require Israel to mobilize 300,000 troops and deploy them into Gaza. That wasn't part of the plan. The Israelis always believed that Gaza and the West Bank would be involved in an intifada type uprising where you could handle it with tens of thousands of border police, maybe some soldiers, but that it would be a secondary issue compared to the main fighting against Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran. But even in with that scenario, with the condition that Hamas wasn't engaged decisively, Israel lost every time. Every time. The only way Israel could take on Iran was with extensive American military support. And that's been something that Israel's been trying to coerce from the United States since the beginning of this conflict, the United States to commit to taking on Iran, something the United States to date refuses to do. But the reason why I bring this up is that what's happening right now is that Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to turn that plan, fighting everybody at once, into victory, even though he knows that when it was tested before the war, Israel couldn't win, and that this current iteration, Israel started off by weakening itself in Gaza and never recovered. By the time they ended up engaging with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the Israeli military was already exhausted. They had run out of spare parts for their tanks. The Merkava 4 tanks were being cannibalized. They had to stop the sale of Merkava 3 tanks to Morocco and other places so that they could use them as replacement tanks. And that's what you see a lot right now is upgraded Merkava 3 tanks because they've run out of Merkava 4 tanks. The Israeli soldiers have never been prepared for a war that lasted more than a year. The Israeli army was always configured to fight short, sharp engagements where they would overwhelm their enemy with firepower and technology. And here we are now, more than a year plus, into a conflict, and the Israeli army is just exhausted morally, physically. The desertion rates are sky high. Some Israeli generals are talking about 12 to 24%, depending on the unit. You have reservists starting to commit suicide rather than report to their units. You have soldiers' morales collapse because they're being asked to go into Gaza and recapture the same territory for the third time. Territory that's already stained with the blood of their comrades, and now they have to go back in and do it again. It's a never-ending fight. The Israelis can't advance in southern Lebanon. It's a death trap. Israelis don't want to go into southern Lebanon. Israelis don't want to go into Gaza. So the military, I don't know if you saw when Israel Katz went in and started briefing, the chief of staff Halevi and other officers, and for the first time he said, "Our goal is to, defeat Hezbollah and disarm them." And you saw the chief of staff go, "What? That's never been our goal. We can't achieve that goal. It's an impossible goal to achieve." But that's the difference between politics, and Israel Katz is a politician loyal to Netanyahu, so he's reading off the Netanyahu playbook, the fiction of the Netanyahu playbook, and the reality that is known by the Israeli generals that this isn't going to happen. But Netanyahu continues to, pontificate and enunciate this kind of policy because this isn't about the survival of Israel. This is about the survival of Netanyahu. He cares about his political legacy, and apparently he's willing to sell Israel down the river to have a chance at emerging from this crisis with his reputation intact. I think I don't think it's going to happen. I think that the Israelis are going to remove him from power soon. They have no choice because these policies can't work in the military. You can't make success happen when you don't have the assets, the resources, the plan, the strategic vision to facilitate that. And that's where the Israeli military is. I think we're in a situation where Netanyahu has fatally wounded Israel, that there's no recovering from this. And there's more and more Israeli generals and politicians that are coming to this conclusion. I've heard them speak it. They, the economy is in, a free fall. It's not going to recover. $67 billion hit last year on the way towards more than $1 billion. This isn't the cost of the war. This is what the economy isn't earning. 60,000 troops, civilians, evicted from the north. Netanyahu said we're going to war in Lebanon to get them to go back. They aren't going home. Tens of thousands more have had to leave because of what Hezbollah is doing, the continued attacks. The port of Eilat is shut down. Haifa is likewise shutting down because you can't ensure shipping as they move into a harbor where you have Hezbollah missiles and drones striking at will. Israel is deeply divided. Even before October 7th, you had hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the street condemning Netanyahu for trying to rewrite Israeli basic law so that the politically aligned Knesset could control the judiciary. Why? So that nobody could try and convict Netanyahu on the corruption charges. He has been indicted for corruption, real corruption, the kind of corruption he'll be found guilty of and spend the rest of his life in jail. So he's trying to manipulate the courts so that he can't be tried. Hundreds of thousands of people protested against that. You now have hundreds of thousands of people protesting against the fact that he hasn't brought the hostages home. And now you're going to have tens of thousands more jump in on that, protesting his firing of the defense minister Gallant. Israel is a nation literally on the cusp of civil war.
Yeah. And, given what you just said there, I wanted to ask you, there is this overall situation that you outline, and it's getting deeper and deeper, it seems. So you have, as you said, Israel not being able to recover from this. And a big reason for this, in my estimation, is that Hezbollah, the Ansar Allah, the resistance in Palestine, all across all these fronts, they're not going to stop what they're doing until they achieve what they want to achieve, given that Israel is showing absolutely under Netanyahu's leadership, no willingness to back down. Actually, everything from here appears to be escalatory, even toward a war with Iran. And then there's this other part of the collapse that's happening, Scott, I wanted your comment on. There was just an Arab Islamic summit in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia lashed out at Israel, accusing it of genocide, saying that it should not attack Iran. And you also have Turkey after the same summit saying it is cutting off all relations with Israel. So one of the objectives that Israel had under the first Trump administration was to normalize with all of the pliant countries that it could in the region. Now that seems like a pipe dream. So it seems like this collapse is only getting deeper and deeper. Scott, what's your assessment of this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's just start off by creating some foundational understandings. Palestine largely stands alone. Saudi Arabia has never been an ally of Palestine. The United Arab Emirates has not been an ally. Kuwait once was, but they currently aren't an ally. Egypt, Turkey, these regional powers that are all today, meeting in Saudi Arabia and talking about Palestine. Historically, they have not been. So for them now to articulate, policies that condemn Israel and back Palestine shows that the genocide that Israel's carrying out against the Palestinian people and the people of southern Lebanon is resonating not amongst the governments that have always had disdain for the Palestinians, but amongst the street, the Arab street, the Turkish street. The people in the street are fed up with this, and their anger is such that it cannot be ignored by the powers that be. So now you see Saudi Arabia, going forward and saying things that should have been said from the very beginning, but weren't, because remember, Saudi Arabia in the previous Trump administration was, part of this master deal called the Abrams Accord. The whole idea of the Abrams Accord was to basically put the nail in the coffin of a free Palestine by ensuring that the West Bank would never be able to serve as the heart of a new Palestinian state. Abraham's Accord allowed Israel to go in and just carve it up, steal more land, create settlements, etc., weakening the Palestinians, all in the name of trying to create a free Palestine, but it was always a lie. But what the Abraham's Accord was also about was normalizing relations with Israel and the Gulf Arab states, particularly United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And what people don't realize is that on October 6th of last year, 2023, Israel and Saudi Arabia were on the cusp of normalization. They were very close to striking a deal that would, create the opportunity for, intense economic intercourse. On September 9th or 19th of 2023, Joe Biden was in India as part of the G20, and he did a press conference where he announced the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor, this wonderful concept that saw ships loaded with containers leaving Indian ports like Mumbai and docking in Dubai, offloading their containers from the ships onto trains, and then the trains would transit the United Arab Emirates, then Saudi Arabia, go into Jordan, through Israel to the Israeli port of Haifa, where they would be loaded back on the ships and taken into a Greek port, and then further on into Europe. This connectivity was there. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the same day that Biden gave his speech, delivered an address, I believe, at the General Assembly in the United Nations, where he said that this is the greatest day in modern Israeli history. This is how much of much magnitude this was. He said this deal, this creation of the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor was a transformational moment that would forever change Israel's relationship with its regional neighbors and redefine Israel as a hub of economic and technological innovation, that Israel would become the center of a new economic engine that would operate in the Middle East and around the world. This would forever change Israel. This is Netanyahu speaking. That's not going to happen now. It's dead. Saudi Arabia has said that they will never consider normalization of relations with Israel until which time there's a free and independent Palestine whose capital is in Jerusalem. And Israelis like Netanyahu and people of his political ilk, they've forsworn that ever happening. They said that will never happen. We will not allow that to happen. So this India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor is dead, not going to happen. This is the reality of that summit. Turkey has these visions of being a regional economic power, to become a gas hub. That means that not only will they serve as a transit from gas from Russia, Turkmenistan, etc., into Europe, but that they will store the gas and become people who are setting the price for gas, that they will drive the market. One of the things that Turkey has been hoping for is to be able to tap into Israel's developing, gas infrastructure, the offshore the gas production that's taking place, and to bring that in and increase Turkey's profile as a regional energy hub. So Turkey's always been hesitant about doing anything that breaks relations with Israel, that disrupts relations with Israel. But now, because of the anger on the Turkish street, the government of Erdogan had to. He just announced that he's severing relations with Turkey. We'll see if this turns into a full-scale economic embargo. Will he stop the flow of Azerbaijani oil and pipelines across Turkish soil, loading on the ships that then take it into Israel? But this is a big deal because what we have are nations that historically have not been fully supportive. I mean, Turkey, has made lip service, but at the end of the day, until recently, Turkey hasn't done anything. I mean, Israel commits genocide, and Turkey says, "Oh, they're committing genocide," but Israel doesn't pay a price. Now Israel's starting to pay a price. Saudi Arabia has literally created the conditions for the end of Israel. Why do I say that? Because Israel won't be able to achieve its dream of being a regional economic hub. And right now, that's the only thing that will save Israel. Israel's economy is in tatters. It's not going to be business as usual. If Israel wants to survive, they're going to need to, basically upgrade their economic profile. And they can't do that unless they normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia says you can't do that until you create a free and independent Palestine. And Israel can't do a free and independent Palestine unless they're willing to dismantle West Bank settlements. And the moment Israel moves to dismantle West Bank settlements, you have a civil war in Israel, a literal civil war, which is the end of Israel. Israel has committed suicide. This is the only good news in all of the bad news that's out there, is that Israel has inflicted so much harm on itself. And even the Israelis admit it. I mean, people are out there going, Scott, you're smoking dope. Scott, you're this. Scott, you're that. Well, I did come up with this on my own. My brain actually came up with this on my own. But then I was pleasantly surprised when I saw retired Israeli brigadier generals give talks to Israeli television and say the exact same thing I'm saying. The exact same thing. Why would he say it? Because it's right. That's why I said it. It's sound analysis. Israel is a fundamentally broken nation state. And the politics of the demographics of Israel, what makes Israel viable from a demographic standpoint, means that the moment Israel starts to collapse and populations start to flee, which is going to happen when Israel is not economically, you can't sustain a population as internally displaced refugees in a nation where everybody expects it to be the land of milk and honey, but now it's going to be a land of poverty. People will flee. And when the Israeli population drops from 9 to 6 to 5 to 4 million, at a time when the corresponding Muslim population is still in the 12 to 15 million, the demographics dictate the outcome. And here's the last bit of good news I'm going to put out there for everybody here. Israel's nuclear weapons. I believe that Israel is destined to be absorbed into a single state known as Palestine. Just like white South Africa, the apartheid state, was absorbed into a single state that was black-dominated Africa. The moment both the government recognized, that's the South African leadership, recognized that this was inevitable, that apartheid was over, they had a nuclear weapons program. I believe they had 7 finished nuclear bombs. And they knew that if the black nationalists took over, that they'd have these nuclear weapons. And they said, we are never going to allow a black nationalist government to have nuclear weapons. So they went to the International Atomic Energy Agency and voluntarily opened themselves up to be disarmed, admitted the program, brought inspectors in, they dismantled the weapons making capability, so that when Nelson Mandela took over, he was not the leader of a nuclear state. Israel, if it collapses in this way, collapses from internal rot as opposed to external force, which is another reason why I encourage the Iranians, don't attack. Let Israel die this natural death. And when they do so, there will come a moment when the Israeli government recognizes that they are going to transition into a Palestinian-dominated singularity, and they can't have them owning nuclear weapons. And Israel will turn to the International Atomic Energy Agency and will voluntarily disarm. And I think that's the fate of Israel's nuclear weapons program.
And then finally, Scott, given all that you've said, a big part of Israel and, of course, Netanyahu and for as far as I see it, the entire Israeli regime, a big objective of it is to expand into Lebanon, to expand into Gaza, to make that into another site of occupation. We just had Donald Trump nominate Mike Huckabee, who believes that the West Bank is part of Israel. So there's a big impetus for Israeli expansion. But how much do you credit the axis of resistance? Because we talked about these other forces. We've talked about those who have been commonly pliant with Israel and compliant with the U.S.-Israeli relationship and what it's doing in the Middle East, but also the axis of resistance through Iran's diplomacy, through the fact that Hezbollah and these other fronts, Ansarallah, they're not going to be defeated on the battlefield. And so how much do you credit the axis of resistance for kind of putting into motion this situation as a response? You know, you're talking about Israel's collapse. How much do you credit them for their response and their ability to hold off Israel and lead to this silver lining, I guess we could say, through all of the destruction and all of the, of course, death that we can't minimize?
Yeah, let me just start off by saying that sometimes when I put on my my analytical hat, my analyst hat, and you start spewing, possibilities, scenarios, etc. It might look like I'm papering over the horror that's taking place in Gaza, the genocide that's taking place amongst the Palestinian people, and the mass murder that's taking place in southern Lebanon. And I'm not. It's there. It's real. Anybody who's listened to me talk about, Hind Rajab and how she was murdered by the Israelis, or talk about any of the Palestinian civilians, the women, the children that have been murdered and are continuing to be murdered, know that this rips my heart apart. I mean, it just is emotionally devastating. But the analyst has to rise above the emotions and try and look at things, with a clear eye, as they say. But I just think whatever scenario we talk about, we need to understand that these scenarios are built on the sacrifice of so many Palestinians. And whatever emerges from this, it will always be built on an edifice of horror and tragedy and murder and genocide of a scope and scale that hasn't been witnessed in modern times. So, I just wanted to put that down there, because sometimes, I start talking about, this policy, that policy, and it's as if these deaths aren't taking place. They are taking place. I'm fully cognizant of it. But, there it is. And now that I've given that introduction, quick remind me just what your question was again.
How much do you credit the axis of resistance
there we go.
for this scenario playing out, where Israel collapse?
I've got that. It's interesting. When this first started, I was in contact with I guess a Kuwaiti who was openly hostile against Iran and Hezbollah. And when Nasrallah gave his first speech, which I think was on October 9th or 10th, he was, Hezbollah has to come in and level Israel. And if it doesn't, look at the coward, look, he doesn't do things and all that. And I wrote an article at the time that talked about what I called Hassan Nasrallah's, masterful escalation management. That what Hezbollah was doing was keeping the focus on Hamas and applying pressure to Israel without going to full-scale conflict. So escalation management, that is to keep the pressure. Israel responds, but you don't overreact. You respond gradually, and you keep this thing, under control. And this has been, and look at Iran. Look at Iran. They attacked Israel with, their first attack was just, a giant, show, sound and light show. Fire all these drones, all these cruise missiles in, get them shot down, but in the end have enough missiles get through to say, see what we can do. And then the second time, it was another more intense sound and light show. Well, here's 180 to 200 missiles. Almost all of them got through. Brilliant light show, boom, 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 boom. But neither one of those attacks were designed to kill Israelis or inflict significant harm on Israel. Escalation management. The same thing with Ansarallah, the Houthi. Escalation management. This has been. These are the two words that I think define the defeat of Israel. Is the effectiveness of the axis of resistance and escalation management, because in doing so, they have maintained control of the operations. There's John Boyd was a colonel, United States Air Force colonel, and I think his nickname was 30-second Boyd, but it might have been 3-minute Boyd. I think it's 30-second Boyd. I don't know. But his thing was as a fighter pilot, when you start off as a fighter pilot, you do the pass, and as soon as you pass, you start to maneuver to see who can shoot each other down. It's the old fighter school. And Boyd's thing was within 30 seconds he could be in a kill position behind you, because he would engage in a series of maneuvers that had him being proactive and any pilot reacting. And by the other pilot reacting to his proaction, he was in control of the maneuvers and he could eventually get in there. And he called it the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. And a key thing about the OODA loop is it's called getting inside your enemy's decision-making cycle. That is that your reaction time, if you draw a circle, is tighter than theirs. Theirs is out here. You're inside it, which means that you're leading the operation the whole time. You're defining this. You're causing the enemy to react to you as opposed to you reacting to the enemy. And escalation management has enabled the axis of resistance to be inside the decision-making cycle of Israel. They control the OODA loop, and that's why they're winning. So this is all about the axis of resistance. This is about the genius of Hassan Nasrallah, the genius of Sinwar, the genius of Raisi before, and the current Iranian leadership today, because they haven't allowed themselves to be compelled by Israel's bluster and actions into overreacting. What they've done is they have managed this fight, stretched it out, and Israel's breaking. And that's the goal and objective of the axis of resistance, is to break Israel down so that the possibility of a free Palestine becomes a probability.
Yeah, indeed. It seems that the axis of resistance has been, as you said, not overstretching itself as Israel overstretches itself, and that creates a favorable dynamic, despite, as you said, that there are losses and there are huge sacrifices, but those sacrifices are leading to something favorable for the axis of resistance. And certainly, while it's under, and that's why I like having these conversations, it's not spoken about enough how the situation looks less and less favorable for Israel. But Scott,
I just want to point out also, one of the, in your chat, I'm not supposed to read the chat, but I do.
You can't help yourself. It's fine. I won't tell anyone.
Gathering intelligence, But somebody in there said, what about the Samson option? Because I was talking about Israel's nuclear weapons program and how if Israel continues to collapse from within, that it will be disarmed. The Samson option is not a proactive, preemptive use of nuclear weapons. The Samson option exists when Israel is being attacked from without by external forces that are threatening to destroy Israel, to overwhelm Israel. And the Samson option is just that. Okay, we're going down, we're taking everybody with us. But it's a violent response to violent actions. The predicate is people attacking. Had the United States in 1988 or 89, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, decided to invade Russia, invade the Soviet Union, and engage in military action, the Soviets had nuclear weapons and there would have been a nuclear war. But that's not how the Soviet Union collapsed. The Soviet Union collapsed from within. internal domestic crises, politics brought the Soviet down. And so their nuclear weapons weren't a factor in that. If Israel collapses from within, from internal rot, from internal strife, civil war, etc., there's no trigger for the Samson option. The nuclear weapons are just there. They're not going to be used. And that's why I didn't bring it up. And that's why I see a scenario in which Israel collapses from its own rot. And then the weapons have to be turned over to the international community, as opposed to, and again, this is why I keep saying it in case any Iranians are listening or will listen, don't attack Israel. Because by attacking Israel with 1,000 or 2,000 missiles, you set in motion events that could lead to the Samson option being initiated. If you just let Israel die, Israel's drunk the poison. Just let the poison take effect. Let Israel die. The nuclear weapons of Israel will be dealt with by the Israelis and the international community. Patience. And I think I don't need to be telling the Iranians this because
seems like
they are very patient. But I say this for the benefit of those in the comment section that are saying Iran has to attack, Iran has to attack, Iran. Why? That's a scenario that could lead to Iran losing. Right now, Iran's winning. Iran wins by doing nothing at this point in time. Literally. Do nothing and let Israel collapse from within. And there's nothing that Donald Trump can do to save.
Yeah, indeed. Even in just the level of political catastrophe alone of what the initial results of such a belief will be, especially with regard to the West Bank, which is definitely no stranger to horrors and tragedy. Even as we speak, things are bound to get a lot worse should an evangelical mindset around what and who the West Bank belongs to actually take some kind of shape policy-wise. But Scott, I wanted to talk to you about a different religion now, and that is the Ukraine project for the United States and NATO. A lot has been said recently about Russia planning a Kursk counteroffensive, as the Western media is calling it. They're saying that 50,000 troops of Russia are just absolutely wreaking havoc on Ukraine. But we're also hearing that Russia is losing, as I'm sure you are aware, upwards of 1,000 plus troops per day alone here. So, Scott, what is happening on the front lines? What is happening in Kursk? We also have this North Korea story. There's just a lot of fog of war, seemingly war propaganda, and I'm wondering your assessment of where things are at and what the truth behind all of this is.
I mean, let's just parse it down bit by bit by bit. But first thing, I'm a big fan of setting the foundational principles at play here. Ukraine is losing. Ukraine is desperate to change the calculus of foreign support so that it can stop losing. It believes it needs more weapons. It needs permission to use longer range weapons. It needs a miracle. It's hard to give you an example about what I'm about to say. The Ukrainian people used to voluntarily donate money in support of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, and indeed tens of billions of dollars have been raised over the course of the conflict for the Ukrainian military from the Ukrainian people. Right now, no money's coming in from the Ukrainian people. Why? Because they don't see any reason to continue to donate money to a lost cause. Now, if you're the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and you're trying to convince Europe and the United States to continue funding this enterprise, you can't allow the reality of the battlefield to be the narrative that the West is embracing. You have to, shift the narrative, at least for public consumption. I think officials understand the truth, but convincing the American people, the British people, the German people, the French people that Ukraine can win. And so in order to do this, They just crank out nonstop propaganda. Let's just admit right off the bat that 1,500 to 1,700 Russian casualties a day is the most absurd thing in the world. Even when Russia's hammering the Ukrainians, they don't achieve casualty figures of that level. And the Ukrainians are not hammering the Russians. The Ukrainians are in a defensive crouch. There are times when the Russians, in attacking, suffer casualties. It's war. But, when I talk to Russian commanders or Russian correspondents on the battlefield, they'll say, yeah, the Russians are suffering casualties, but nothing like what the Ukrainians are suffering. Depending on the day, the casualty ratio will be 5 to 1 to 20 to 1. I mean, there's days when the Russians are killing 20 Ukrainians for every dead Russian. On normal days, they're killing 5 for every Russian. But that's the reality. But what they say is the way the war is being fought now, with drones and the control and the close coordination, etc. They say there's days where Russia will not suffer a single a death on the battlefield, because Russia is in control of the fighting. There's a reason why we don't see the big arrows, because Russia is not in the business of suffering the casualties associated with big arrows. The Russians are doing a very deliberate attack. They take this tree line, they take this building, they take this juncture, they pause, they regroup, they come back in, achieve fire supremacy, bring in the drones, maneuver in, take the next tree line, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, there's some times where the Ukrainians, because they are capable fighters, you'll catch the Russians off guard, and you'll see videos of 3 or 4 destroyed Russian vehicles with 12 dead Russians littering the ground around it. War. But the idea of 1,700, that's pure propaganda designed to influence the mindset of the civilian populations in the nations that are being called upon to provide more assistance to Ukraine. But it has nothing to do with reality. And I would say that the North Korean story seems to be of a similar nature. First of all, what's the legal basis of the North Korean soldiers in Russia? Because the last time I checked, they were talking about these soldiers already being there employed in combat before the strategic pact between Russia and North Korea had been signed and ratified and turned into law. And the one thing I know about Russia and North Korea is they sort of require the I's to be dotted and the T's to be crossed on all their legal documents before they go forward, that they don't get ahead of the game in terms of things like that. So right off the bat, the story of North Korean troops engaged in combat stinks to high heaven. It doesn't make any sense because the legal foundation just isn't there. And then we get into the practicalities of it. There's not a military professional alive that thinks this is a good idea. How do you take North Korean soldiers, 10,000 of them, and integrate them into a Russian organizational structure? They haven't trained together. They don't have any tactical commonality, operational commonality. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same equipment. They don't have the same communications capabilities. Their understandings of the concepts of war are different. How they use artillery, how they use... It makes no sense. And then finally, there's the whole issue of Kursk. Kursk is religious ground for the Russians. I mean, this is the scene of the greatest tank battle in history between Nazi Germany and Russia. This was the battle that forever tipped the fortune of war during the Second World War. After the Battle of Kursk, the Germans never had the offensive initiative that they were always defending. Their defeat was inevitable. This was the tipping point. And the blood spilled on this soil made this soil sacred. So the idea that Russia is going to turn over responsibility for the recapture of this sacred soil, Russian soil, to North Koreans, none of it makes sense. What is happening, I believe, is that Ukraine is making a desperate bid to get South Korea involved. They want South Korea to provide arms, munitions, and they want South Korea to, provide, political and military support. And South Korea has said they will do that if North Korea gets involved in the fighting. So you see, because when you look at the sources, all the sources about North Korean involvement are Ukrainian. The Ukrainians. I mean, one of the big stories originated from the Center for Countering Disinformation.
Oh, we know them.
Yes. And so they're out there, playing the role of, leading investigative journalists. The Center for Countering Disinformation has proved that, that the North Koreans are fighting Ukrainians in Kursk. Well, where's your proof? Where's your evidence? I think it's one giant propaganda ploy, again, designed to sow the seeds of confidence in populations that otherwise would be opposed to continuing to throw good money after bad into Ukraine. Ukraine has lost this war. They're not going to be able to reverse this. It's not just the military defeat that's taking place, but winter is upon us. And the colder it gets, the worse off it gets. 90% of Ukraine's thermal production capacity is destroyed irreparably. It's not going to be repaired in time for winter. That means that when the winter comes, there will be no electricity, no running water, nothing for tens of millions of Ukrainian citizens who I believe are going to be compelled into, becoming internally displaced refugees or fleeing the country, creating a refugee crisis in a Europe that's already had it up to here with Ukrainian refugees. They're overwhelmed with, illegal immigrants from North Africa and the Middle East. They have their own financial problems, political problems, and the last thing they need is a new tidal wave of Ukrainian refugees. And the pressure is going to be put on Ukraine to bring this thing to an end. And I think that's the direction we're heading.
Yeah, and given that direction that we're heading in, Scott, how do you see what happens next here? Because all of this rests on the foundation that Russia is winning, that the Kursk situation is not looking good for Ukraine, however gradual that process plays out. The front line appears to be completely in Russia's favor. And now we have talks of the Trump administration coming in, talking about forming a peace envoy to try to settle this conflict. What do you make of what's going to happen from here, given the fact that we've, of course, heard Trump and now what is becoming his new administration talk a lot about settling this conflict? But I've heard you talk about that the terms that have been given so far are not realistic and not serious. So how do you see this playing out in the months ahead as we do enter what is likely to be a long winter?
Trump, when you look at his national security picks, there's a theme that comes out. Peace through strength is his thing, meaning that they want peace, but they've got to be strong. And then when it comes to the military, the military will never back down. Now, this is a recipe for disaster, because if you approach it peace through strength, that means I'm coming in saying I want peace, but if you don't do it my way, I'm going to bring in my military. And the military doesn't back down, which means there's no reverse. We're going in. That seems to be an odd stance for a president who says that who ran on a no war platform. So I'm hoping against hope that this is a lot of posturing and posing and bluster, and that Trump will be far more realistic. The fact of the matter is, there will not be a magic phone call between Trump and Putin. Putin won't even take that call. I mean, if Trump thinks he's going to call it, remember the Washington Post ran a story a couple of days ago, based on good sources inside the Trump administration,
Call happened.
that Trump called Putin,
Yep.
and that he laid the law down on Putin. What had to
Right.
happen, things that had to happen. And I saw that. I went, not only did this conversation not happen, but had Trump tried to talk to Putin like that, the conversation would have been over. The Russian president isn't somebody to be talked to in that way. He's not going to be talked to in that way, not by Trump. Um, I think Trump's smart enough to know that. And so when I saw it, I said, it's a lie. That conversation never took place. And sure enough, the Russian government came out and said that conversation never took place because it didn't. It was made up. Why? Well, again, to sow confusion, dissent, etc. To bring about distrust amongst within the Russian camp towards Trump, or within Trump towards Russia. People are afraid of the Trump administration actually being able to get along with the Russians. There will be no Trump dictated peace plan, especially along the lines that people are putting out there. There will be no frozen conflict. The concept that you're going to have a Korean War type ending, a demilitarized zone, is absurd in the extreme. Vladimir Putin has said straight up that all of Kherson, all of Zaporizhia, all of Donetsk, and all of Lugansk, and all of Kursk are part of Russia. And Russia will own every square inch. He's also said now that there will be a buffer zone, a demilitarized buffer zone. He's also said recently that territories in Ukraine where there are significant Russian populations will be given the opportunity to hold a referendum to decide if they want to stay in Ukraine or join Russia. We're talking about Odessa, Kharkov, things of that nature. Russia's not backing down from this. Russia's not going to negotiate this away. Russia didn't fight 2.5-year-long war just to give it up to Donald Trump because Donald Trump came in and huffed and puffed and tried to blow the house down. It's not going to happen. Russia's already accepted the fact that the United States is an adversary seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. That's the reality as it exists today. And they're going to treat Donald Trump as an extension of that policy line until Trump proves otherwise. But until then, Russia's ready for existential struggle with the West over Ukraine. That's how important this is. So Russia's not going to negotiate any of this stuff away. What's on the table is a modified version of the Istanbul communique, the agreement that had been finalized in late March, early April of 2022. Boris Johnson in the United States pressured the Ukrainians to walk away from this peace treaty. Putin has said that's on there. There's some stringent things in there. Demilitarization. Ukraine won't be allowed to have a military more than 50,000 strong, and none of it will be NATO equipped or NATO influenced. Denazification. Stepan Bandera and the ideology of Banderism is over. Russia will not allow it to continue. There will be constitutional changes to outlaw this. This is the reality. The fact that nobody in the Trump administration is talking about this reality shows you how ignorant they are about the real situation that's going on here. The best the Trump administration can do is turn off the spigot to Ukraine and starve them of the resources necessary to continue this conflict. Whether they'll do that is another question, because one of the things that Trump has said is that he's going to tell the Ukrainians he's shutting off the spigot, but he's also going to tell the Russians that if they don't accept the Trump dictated peace terms, that spigot can be turned back on. So from the Russian perspective, they just assume the spigot's going to stay on, and they're going to continue to do what they do, which is to strategically defeat Ukraine, NATO, the European Union, and the United States.
Yeah, we're seeing the outcome of this pretty clearly. There's the battlefield situation, of course, and then we have developments in Germany. That government is collapsing. It was so interesting reading Reuters' take on why the current government coalition in Germany is collapsing. Very little talk about Ukraine. Actually, almost so little you would think that Ukraine has had absolutely no role in Germany's collapse. But I wanted to ask you, Scott, given this, given that we're seeing the defeat on all fronts happening with regard to the collective West in Ukraine, we also have the Biden administration saying that they are going to push through all of the funding necessary before Trump comes into Ukraine. What does this even mean in this context where it appears that that is more blowing smoke than anything else? Like, what could the outgoing Biden administration do to essentially fortify Ukraine? It seems very unlikely, but I'm curious on what your thoughts are.
Well, there's nothing they can do to fortify Ukraine. What they're doing is purely political in nature. They conflict, debate, and discussion to ensure that they're not blamed for Ukraine's downfall. I think the argument they're going to be making going forward is that the Biden administration was doing everything possible to promote the survival of Ukraine and the eventual victory of Ukraine over Russia, and that it was the Trump administration that's responsible for the defeat, because there will be a defeat. Ukraine will not win. The Trump administration can't turn this thing around. And so this is just the Biden administration posturing politically to ensure that the responsibility for the defeat of Ukraine by Russia goes on the shoulders of Donald Trump. I don't think that charge is going to stick. I think everybody knows who's responsible for this failed policy, and his name is Joe Biden. But that's what's going on here. It's a futile effort. It's a waste of taxpayer money. Again, if I were a voter, they've already voted, but if I were somebody in North Carolina or Tennessee or Georgia where floods came rolling in, $750 bailout check, I'd be furious at the Biden administration throwing good money after bad. It makes no sense whatsoever. Even the Biden administration understands that Ukraine has lost this, and yet they're going to continue to throw money at Ukraine so that they can say we did everything possible to help Ukraine win, and the blame is with Trump.
Yeah, and it seems like the United States, they've said it over and over again. I believe the United States is relying on monthly production of armaments to provide to Ukraine because the United States doesn't want to deplete. It has an entire empire to maintain. It doesn't want to deplete its stockpiles, it's our arsenal for the other wars that it wants to wage, not only in what's happening in West Asia, but also against China. There's a huge Pacific theater that the United States will not abandon, especially as the incoming Trump administration comes out. So it seems like this promise to Ukraine is more empty rhetoric than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important point. Every major combatant command that the United States has war plans, and most of those war plans are linked to resources necessary to allow those war plans to be carried out, especially in nations in theaters such as the Pacific, where you have the real possibility of a conflict with China over Taiwan, in Europe, where you have the real possibility of a conflict with Russia, on the ground somewhere in Europe, in the Middle East, where we have a real possibility of a conflict with Iran. The war plans allocate troops, and those troops have certain weapon systems that will be employed in combat for a defined period of time. There will be ammunition expenditure rates built into this plan. And so what happens is you need to have a sufficient stockpile of weapons on hand dedicated to that plan, so that if the balloon goes up and the military starts to cross the line of departure, they have the weapons necessary to initiate and sustain for a finite period of time this conflict. We have given away all of our strategic fat. That is, the weapons that are above and beyond the bare minimum to execute war plans. And remember, we have to be prepared to execute a war plan in all places. It's not like we have a single ammunition dump that we say, all right, well, oh, it's war in Pacific. Like, shut down Europe, shut down the Middle East, shut down Venezuela. We're going to the Pacific, and all the weapons go over to the Pacific. No, the Pacific has its own weapons. Europe has its own weapons. Middle East has their own weapons, etc. We've gotten to the point now where these stockpiles have been diminished to the point that we may not be able to initiate and sustain combat that along the lines planned in the operational plan, that our American forces will be committed into action and run out of ammunition early on. That leads to the inevitability of their defeat. And so we can't give away any more ammunition. We have to build new ammunition, but we can't dig into our pockets and give it to Ukraine anymore. I mean, this is the reality of not just the United States, but all of Europe, all of NATO. NATO lacks ammunition reserves. I mean, I had to laugh when Admiral Bauer, the German, said, you know, if Russia didn't have that nuclear weapon issue, we'd have gone in there and kicked them out of Ukraine, we being NATO. And I'm like, really? With what? How are you going to do that? You don't have any ammunition. You don't have any tanks. You don't have any armored fighting vehicles. You don't have anything. And you're talking about going to war with Russia that has a defense industry that outproduces everything. We have done so much harm to the national security of the United States. And I guess the good news is, even if the Trump administration wanted to go to war, they're going to have to yield to the professional advice given by the military that will say the same thing over and over. Mr. President, we can't sustain it. We can't go to war until we start building up ammunition reserves. But as we build them up, we have to stop giving them away to Ukraine and to Israel. I mean, they're just burning through. Israel's burning through 2,000-pound bombs like they're out of style. Artillery shells, etc. So the good news is that even if Trump wanted to go to war early on, he doesn't have the capacity to do any large scale ground fighting, whether it's in Asia, West Asia, or Europe. The bad news is, if he pushes the situation anyways, remember, peace through strength, and the U.S. military doesn't back down. But what happens if you do the peace through strength bluster, and the enemy says, screw it, let's see how strong you are. And our military doesn't back down, but we just ran out of ammunition because we burned it all up in Ukraine. And the only thing we have left is nuclear weapons. And because we don't back down, we now have a nuclear conflict at hand. Because one of the scenarios in which America can use nuclear weapons preemptively in a non-nuclear environment is a conventional war scenario where a significant number of American lives are at risk unless we do something to eliminate that risk, the source of that risk, with tactical nuclear weapons. It's the way the war plan is written. So it's a very dangerous situation we're in right now. Anyways, I sort of went off on a little tangent there.
No, I think it's a good place to segue into the final act here that I wanted to talk to you about, which is all of these appointments and all of the buildup toward Trump 2.0 that is coming. And given this geopolitical context where we speak about often here, Scott, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is what's happening in West Asia, from Gaza to Lebanon, Iran, and beyond, whether it is, of course, the Asia Pacific theater, we have a situation, it seems, where Donald Trump, there have been more announcements coming in. We have Tulsi Gabbard now as Director of National Intelligence. This comes after a slew of announcements, which I think raised a lot of eyebrows for some. For me, I was not so shocked, although Marco Rubio definitely gave me a little chuckle after all of the enthusiasm about Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley. Marco Rubio certainly isn't an apple that falls far from that tree. So we have Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. We have Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor. And of course, we have I can't pronounce his name. The Fox News
Hezbollah.
television.
Hezbollah? Something like that.
He is the Secretary of Defense, which is interesting. Of course, we've talked about Mike Huckabee being his ambassador to Israel, which is, I guess, less maybe less impactful. We also have of course, the UN ambassador for the United States will be Stefanik, Elise Stefanik. And all of these folks have a common thread to them. There's a deep Iran and China thread here that runs through their veins in terms of hawkishness. And of course, this will have implications for the Ukraine conflict, because as you've been saying, Scott, we can't necessarily believe that Trump can or even wants to come to a legitimate settlement to this conflict, given that there's only one, Russia's terms. So, Scott, what do you expect here? What is your reaction to all of these picks and their importance to what's to come for the world?
Well, it's, again, I do what I do, the foundational framework that we have to put in place here. Trump is pushing for what he calls recess appointments. That is, he wants to rush these guys through. He wants them to be approved so they can start work on day one, etc. He wants the Senate to rubber stamp them. Mitch McConnell, the outgoing Senate Majority Leader, has conspired through parliamentarian maneuvering to hold a vote for the replacement Senate Majority Leader using a secret vote, and that shields senators from retribution from Donald Trump if they ever find out who voted which way. But the idea is to, I think John Cornyn is one, and a guy, Thune is the other. Rick Scott from Florida was the Trump guy, who would have had he been Senate Majority Leader, would have gone along with the rapid confirmation of these appointees, these nominees. But now it looks like you're going to get some people that may not be inclined to accede to Trump's demands for recess appointments and things of that nature. And if that's the case, that means that there could be senatorial pushback against some of the more extreme Trump nominees. For instance, the Secretary of Defense. There's just widespread dismay over this choice. They don't believe that he's a serious candidate. They don't believe that he has what it takes to be Secretary of Defense. Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. I mean, I think it's funny as hell. And I'm somebody who, if Matt Gaetz became Attorney General, I'd begin to have confidence that Trump was going to take down the Department of Justice and the FBI. But the Senate may not confirm him because it is an outlandish nomination. The Senate may not confirm Hesketh as Secretary of Defense. Tulsi Gabbard, I'm actually pleased with her nomination as Director of National Intelligence. I think she has integrity. I know there's going to be people out there, she's a Zionist, she's the worst thing in the world. They're all Zionists. Let's just say that straight up. There's not a single person appointed in the Trump administration who isn't rabidly pro-Israel. All right, so we accept that. I mean, it's not a good thing, but I mean, we just have to accept that as the reality of a Trump administration. He was never going to bring in somebody who was a free Palestine person. It just wasn't going to happen. So for all you haters out there, Tulsi Gabbard sucks because she did this. Yeah, but she's also one of the few people that has said maybe it's important to talk to Bashar al-Assad. Maybe it's important to talk to Vladimir Putin. Maybe it's important for us to, follow through with the promise made by John F. Kennedy in his American University address in April of 1963, where he said, we need to walk in the shoes of our adversaries. We need to see the world from their perspective so that we understand where they're coming from, and maybe we can come up with a way to live together in peace and harmony. I think the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is willing to, listen to the point of view of people that the United States views as adversaries, the people that the United States government is actively trying to overthrow, that she's willing to listen to them, shows a maturity of mindset that would play well when you're considering the threats that in the prioritization of the threats that America faces. So I think she's a very good nominee. Marco Rubio, look, he's a Zionist pet project. Miriam Adelson's $100 million, I believe, had a little flyer attached to it because
Yes.
Rubio was basically the project of her husband. Her husband's been grooming Rubio forever to become a senator and to move into bigger and better positions. And I honestly believe that one of the sweet nothings she whispered into Trump's ears as she slid that $100 million check into his pocket was, you have to do something with Marco Rubio. Rubio has to be part of your administration. And so he made him Secretary of State. It's a disaster, but Rubio will be, because he's part of the Senate club, he will be confirmed. Many of the others will be as well. Radcliffe for director of CIA will probably get confirmed. National Security Advisor doesn't require Senate confirmation, so that's that. But I do think we're going to see tremendous pushback against Matt Gaetz and Hezbollah as Secretary of Defense, and to a lesser extent, but still significantly, Tulsi Gabbard. They'll push back against her. I think Tulsi could actually ride it through because she is a quality person who has done honorable service in the United States military. She still is a lieutenant colonel. So I think that she may get through that. I'd love Matt Gaetz to get through just because I hate the Department of Justice and I'd love to see it crumble into nothing. But probably won't get through the Senate. And I don't think Hesketh gets through as well. I think, had Rick Scott been the replacement Senate Majority Leader, you'd see that. But what this does is it creates unnecessary friction for Donald Trump early on in his administration. Now you're going to be having a battle, Republican on Republican battle. Not good optics early on. It's going to be disruptive to Trump. So I think, this isn't going to be the smooth sailing that Donald Trump wanted. I think, again, in many ways, is his own worst enemy. You didn't have to pick Matt Gaetz. You didn't. I mean, Jim Jordan would have been a much better selection than Matt Gaetz. You can't pick somebody to be the attorney general who has ongoing allegations of sex trafficking and, things of that nature. It doesn't make any sense. And Hesketh, he has no credibility in this. I will say this. The one thing that Hesketh did, say at one point in time was the recognition that defense procurement is broken. But you know what? He could be a nice deputy assistant secretary of defense for procurement to fix that. But you don't make him secretary of defense. And I don't think this nomination is going through.
Scott, what have you made about those who are so shocked about some of the big neocon elements that have been chosen by Donald Trump? In particular, I think the Marco Rubio decision really incited the most backlash. Now, Marco Rubio can't even travel to China. So I remember, I know you were reminiscing recently of the March, I believe that was the 2021 Anchorage, Alaska meeting between Antony Blinken and I believe at the time it was Yang Jiechi, who was the foreign minister for China, and how absolutely embarrassing it was to see Antony Blinken try to lecture China, then China lashing out and very publicly rebuking the United States for doing so. But Marco Rubio can't even go to China. So, and I can't imagine Marco Rubio touching the Ukraine conflict with any sized poll we want to throw out there, given his orientation to foreign policy since the beginning of his political career. I mean, this is supposed to be the United States' top diplomat, Scott, but what do you make of people's surprise about the kind of neocon hawkishness of Trump? I know you've talked a lot about what Trump did during his first administration. Seems to be a little bit of amnesia there, maybe. Perhaps you can help some folks out putting all this into context.
Well, I mean, this was supposed to be different this time. Donald Trump in his interview with Joe Rogan said, "I made mistakes in 2016. I wasn't ready to govern, and I surrounded myself with bad people from the establishment because I didn't have a foundation of followers that I could draw upon. This time it'll be different," he said, because he knows what he's getting into, and he has people. He has a trust fund of talent to draw upon. But this is Donald Trump too. I mean, we just have to understand that this is not your normal run of the mill politician. First of all, Donald Trump is the ultimate decision maker. That normally when you form a cabinet, you want to form a cabinet of extraordinarily capable people who can operate independent, with minimal supervision, etc. I don't think a Trump cabinet works that way. I think he's a micromanager. He doesn't delegate well, and so at the end of the day, oftentimes the cabinet member is going to be simply implementing plans dictated to them by Donald Trump. And it'd be interesting to see how Marco Rubio responds to that kind of environment. I honestly believe, and here we can call this a prediction, that relations with China are going to be managed by the National Security Advisor and a special envoy that will be appointed, because you can't send Rubio. And the same thing with Russia. I don't think you're going to see Rubio interfacing in a meaningful fashion with his Russian counterparts early on. There will have to be some sort of special envoy that does this, because could you imagine Marco Rubio sitting across from Sergei Lavrov and having a civil conversation? And do you think for a second the Russians would allow themselves to be lectured to by the likes of Marco Rubio? The Chinese won't, and the Russians won't. So, in many ways, Rubio is a horrible pick, and it appears that his priority is going to be Latin America. Venezuela, Brazil, Cuba. But is that really what we want from a Secretary of State, to be a person singularly focused on one region in the world? That's what we have Undersecretary of States for Political Affairs in Latin America for. So it's confusing what Trump has done. Yes, he didn't appoint Pompeo. Yes, he didn't appoint Nikki Haley. But he did appoint a lot of people with very strong pro-Israeli postures. But that was never going to be otherwise. I mean, we knew this was the case. Hell, the guy practically converted to Judaism during his campaign. So that shouldn't have. It could be shocking to people, but anybody that thought Donald Trump was going to come in and promote pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas figures into his administration, you're smoking dope. But the problem is, he didn't bring anybody in other than Tulsi Gabbard so far that has the wherewithal to deal with Russia in terms of the reality of Russia, as opposed to the fiction created by the Russophobic people that dominate the establishment. We're getting the establishment narrative when it comes to Russia, this pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russia thing. And the same thing with China. We don't have people that are advising the president who are experts on China, who can speak about all the nuances of China, etc. Instead, we have Sinophobes, people in there they hate China, and they are seeking confrontation with China. And so from the Chinese and the Russian perspectives, how do you deal with these idiots? And I'm just afraid that at a time when we need very focused, sane diplomatic interactions, we're just going to get more of the same. We're going to get more prejudice. I mean, it's frustrating for me. I spent, the better part of a year trying to travel back and forth into Russia, learning about Russia, to bring it out, to try and defeat Russophobia. And I believe, even though I would have liked to see more of Russia, what I saw was sufficient enough to convince me that Russia poses no threat to the United States. But voices like mine will never be heard inside the Trump administration because they've closed out all that, just like they've closed out any possibility of rationally addressing the Palestinian issue by denying the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas people a voice. This Trump administration is going to do the same with both Russia and China, denying voices of sanity the opportunity to be heard within the inner sanctum of the White House decision making. And this means that we just get the same old pattern of behavior with Russia, which is bad if you're Donald Trump and you truly want to promote peace, because this will just lead to a situation where we have no choice but to seek peace through strength, to posture ourselves strongly, and then have our bluff called, forcing the military to step forward, and the military doesn't back down. And so now we're into this conflict that didn't need to be fought, and we can't win except for using nuclear weapons, and boom, the world comes to an end. There's a price to be paid for incompetence. And unfortunately, right now, much of the Trump team that's been assembled is incompetent.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this incoming Trump administration versus the last one was or is that now Donald Trump is inheriting some rather than forever wars that might have been going on for actually quite a long time, whether it was the occupation of Afghanistan, the dirty war in Syria. Now Donald Trump is inheriting, we can't call them fresh wars because the Ukraine conflict is several years old. Of course, what's happening in Gaza and West Asia is many, now over a year. But at the same time, these conflicts are very intense right now, and they're really going to pose, I think, a challenge to the Trump administration, especially these folks like Marco Rubio and whoever the defense secretary is. They're going to have to, it seems, not because of their own desires, but it seems the way that these conflicts, the way that geopolitics is going right now, there's going to be some very difficult decisions to make with regard to Ukraine, with regard to West Asia. And I'm curious on how you see that context playing into perhaps, people might get mad at me for saying this, but during the first Trump administration, there were a few kernels of opportunity. The Korea talks, which in my estimation was because of South Korea and North Korea being able to talk to each other at that time. That's gone now, but at that time they were, and Trump was able to go in there and say, "Hey, this could be something that I can do that could make things." But of course, they can make things better for me, and and of course, the Korea is better for themselves. But of course, the neocons completely ousted that. They made that impossible. There was the Helsinki talks, which were very tepid, but at the same time, they were something. They were talks. They were having Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump literally talking to each other, which is not happening right now between the United States and Russia. So do you see that there might be, given that the geopolitical situation in the world is so intense, that some of these kernels of opportunity for building toward peace might arise, regardless of Trump and his administration, how hawkish they are? Just the fact that it is an incoming administration, it is one that is likely to be rife with quite a lot of chaos, given how the first Trump administration was, how that all went down between 2016 and 2020.
Well, I think that, again, sorry to do this to you, but foundational principles before we move on into specific answers. The world today is a far different world than the world that existed during the first Trump administration. And the primary difference is what's happened with Russia, China, India, the global South coalescing into this new consensus-driven multilateral organization called BRICS. Yes, BRICS existed during the first Trump administration, but it wasn't a mature organization. It wasn't looking to expand. It was just sort of a consultative club. But because of the consequences of the Russian decision to initiate their special military operation to invade Ukraine in 2022, and the sanctioning of Russia, and the fact that Russia was able to use its considerable diplomatic skills and to craft a family of nations that weren't going to cooperate with sanctions, enabling Russia not only to survive but to thrive economically. Before Russia went into Ukraine, they did so, I think, on February 24th. On February 4th, Vladimir Putin flew to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping on the eve of the Beijing Winter Olympics. And they released a joint 5,000 plus word statement that was in effect a declaration of war against the rules-based international order, against American hegemony. They said that that time is over, finished. And this is before the war even began. This was Russia and China reacting to the arrogance of the West in trying to dictate solutions by threatening sanctions against Russia. At that time, I think in the statement, the Russians and the Chinese talked about, three different venues that could be explored to offset the influence of the G7, of NATO, etc. They mentioned BRICS, but they also mentioned the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They mentioned the G20. All three of these were seen to be mature things. BRICS, did not stand out by itself, but a couple things happened. China had chairmanship of the BRICS forum in 2022, and at that forum, Russia began to push the notion of expansion of BRICS and of a singular currency. They weren't able to do the singular currency, but they took it under consideration in 2023 in South Africa, which hosted the BRICS forum. They expanded BRICS from the 5 core members. They brought in, originally 6 were invited. Argentina dropped out. Saudi Arabia hasn't totally committed, but Ethiopia, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and Iran are now, were invited as permanent members, bringing the membership up to 9. And then this time in 2024, Russia basically brought BRICS into maturity. They had over 200 ministerial meetings in the lead up to the Kazan summit in October. These are meetings between leaders, foreign ministers, economic ministers, where they began to institutionalize BRICS, to turn it from this casual club into a formal institution able to compete toe-to-toe with the G7, etc. And in doing so, the Russians and the Chinese said BRICS is the leading forum over Shanghai Cooperation Organization and G20. BRICS is the most important. BRICS didn't exist in the first Trump administration. Didn't exist at all. This is the new reality that Trump's going to have to deal with, because when Trump was first president first time in 2016, 2017, he was sort of, what was that old commercial when so-and-so speaks, everybody listens? It was like a financial, E.F. Hutton. When E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens. And so that was the first Trump administration. When Donald Trump speaks, everybody listens. But now we're at the point where when Donald Trump speaks, nobody gives a damn. The world has changed. You see, when the United States postures itself in an adversarial role for a long period of time and implements policies such as, punitive sanctioning, theft of sovereign wealth funds, things of that nature, the world adapts and basically isolates itself from uh, the countries and the policies that bring harm to them. And that's what BRICS has done. BRICS has created an alternative universe that can exist without the United States. So when Trump comes in and starts posturing and saying, I'm Donald Trump, I'm the United States, I matter, more often than not, he's going to be in an empty room screaming to himself, because the Russians aren't going to come in there and talk to him under those circumstances. The Chinese aren't. Now, the question is Donald Trump smart enough to realize this? I think the answer is yes. I don't think he's a stupid man. And I guess the precedent I'll use is what he tried to do with North Korea in his first term. He went against everybody. He went against the Pentagon, against the State Department, against the CIA, against the Department of Energy. He went against his Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor. He said, I believe in this. And he almost got it done. It was just Pompeo and Bolton that stabbed him in the back in the end, but he almost got it done. This is a guy that was willing to meet with Kim Jong-un at the DMZ and take a step across into North Korea. I mean, say what you want about Donald Trump, and I'm as critical of him as the day is long. Same. That, my friend, was what American presidents should be doing. And so I think that man still exists. I think the man that understands that you can't send, Marco Rubio to interface with Sergei Lavrov, that the initial meeting with Russia is going to have to be Donald Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump meeting with Xi Jinping on China, this level of meeting, because that's the only way change is going to be done. Marco Rubio is not going to be the tip of the spear for meaningful change. Marco Rubio is the old establishment. He is the bad guy here. He is everything that's wrong with American foreign policy. But Donald Trump has the ability just to say, screw it, I'm going on a plane and I'm going to talk. And people say, what are you going to talk about? I don't know, whatever we want to. He doesn't, he's not a man that needs to have detailed plans together and all this stuff. There's bad side to that, because if he does come to an agreement, how do you turn that agreement into actual, treaties, etc.? Normally, you sort of work this thing through the system and it comes up to the president, and the president doesn't have the meeting until everything's ready. Here, it's going to be the other way around. Trump's going to go in and have the meeting, and then the system's going to have to catch up. And who knows if the system's capable of doing that, especially if Trump follows through with his promise to, end the jobs of tens of thousands of federal employees, relocate federal agencies to more conservative, friendly parts of the country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you have this chaos going on in the establishment at a time when they're being called upon to cobble together, world-changing agreements. But it's Trump. And that's just the way Trump world works.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good place to stop. I'll just quickly say thanks to the super chats. There was one super chat question, Scott. If you wanted to do a non-loquacious version, as your host Jeff would say, a brief answer to this one as I go through the super chats. I'll just put them on the screen. But why is your name this? I'm actually not going to put it up because their YouTube name is a little ridiculous. But the question for you, Scott, was, with Russia outproducing the combined West in arms and artillery greater than 3-1, at what point does the West run out? Thank you so much to this user, but I'm not going to put up your YouTube name. I hope you understand.
I wish I saw it. But it's misleading. I just want to say this. The United States doesn't produce on the level that Russia does because we are in a mode where the defense industry is about making money, not about doing what's right for the country. But people do need to understand that we have production capacity. And if the president of the United States were ever to sign emergency decrees that took away, the normal procurement, chain, et cetera, we could start producing a lot of stuff relatively quickly. We just don't right now because we have, defense contractors that are in it to make money. But if we change the equation and we say, well, it's no longer about making money, it's about doing what the United States government tells you to do because we're in a state of war and we need you to start pumping things out, then they'll do it. So it's Europe has shot itself in the foot. I don't know if Europe's, defense industries can ever catch up because they have fundamentally broken their economies, but the American economy has not reached that level yet. And so we could become the literal arsenal of democracy as we have done in the past. It would just require executive decision making and more or less acknowledgement that we're in a state of war with Russia to do that. And until that's done, Russia's outproducing us. And what happens is that where we're at, we already talked about this, where the United States has dipped into its reserves and burned through them, and now we don't have anything left, and we don't have the production capacity to, build up our reserves, support Ukraine, support Israel, all at the same time, and so it puts us in trouble. I'll stop there because you said non-loquacious version, so I'll do my.
I was just trying to be mindful of your. I know it's getting late. I know your voice is getting lost a bit, which is understandable because we've been talking for 2 hours. So everybody, be sure to go to the video description before you go, where you can find Scott's website and all the places you can find his work there and support him. Also go to the video description to find all the places you can support this channel, from Patreon, Substack, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and other options. Thank you to everyone on Rumble for tuning in. Thanks to all the moderators here on YouTube. Thanks to all the viewers. And this is actually likely my last evening live stream for a while, as my schedule will be changing. So next time you see Scott and I together, it may be at a much different time. So Scott, you have the last evening show of all time. Perhaps there may be evening shows once in a while. I'm not going to say about it, but you are likely the last evening show as my.
I have a question for you, if you don't mind. I'm going to ask it live because it's relevant.
Sure.
With shows like this that you and I do, what are your metrics? I mean, how many viewers do you register for a show like this? Over the course of a week, I guess, because you show this and people watch it.
This one is going to do quite well, given how we had a really big audience tonight. Actually, quite surprising. I didn't think it was going to be as big, given usually you can tell by how many people are waiting, how good, or sometimes you can estimate. I've now done so many streams that I can kind of estimate, okay, well, if there's 200 people waiting, it'll be likely this many viewers. But it also depends on so many other things. But this stream will do quite well. I think we've already gotten, let's see, where is it? Okay, here it is. Over 84,000 views just
right.
as we're
but in a week's time, do you see hundreds of thousands of views?
Yeah, I think everything always plateaus on YouTube usually, unless sometimes there are kind of freakish things that happen in the world maybe that bumps it up. But usually in the first day or two, the video gets most of the views it's ever going to get. So this one will probably get over 200,000, I'm guessing.
Right. Well, the reason why I bring it up is that
maybe 300,000.
In the course of a week, I do Judge Napolitano's show. That one will get hundreds of thousands of views, maybe 300, 400,000 views. I've done your show. That's going to get, a couple 100,000 views. I do Nima, the Brazilian gentleman's show. That gets hundreds of thousands. And the point I'm trying to make up is I want to thank the audience, because this model that we've put together here, where we cooperate in what I call a family of podcasts, we outperform CNN, we outperform MSNBC. This podcast that you do is part of a network that is starting to have real impact on how America gathers its news and such. And so I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to thank your audience for making this happen. It's actually a pretty cool thing. And I also want to use that as a segue to say that it will only continue to happen if you continue to support Danny Dhaiphong. So, make sure that, Danny talks about hitting the like and that getting the algorithms that I don't understand and all that kind of stuff.
Me either, honestly. I just know it's supposed to be said.
But the people that do the super chats, the people that donate, the people that, this is absolutely important. Danny participated in a panel that we had in New York City last month, October 26th. Again, a panel that's reflective of what I call the family of podcasts, where we brought in these various personalities that appear on these broadcasts. This was a world-class panel. The quality of the discussion, the personnel in there matches anything that Harvard, Yale, Stanford could put up there. And it's a byproduct of this alternative media universe that is starting to coalesce in a meaningful fashion. So I just want to thank you for being part of that, and I want to thank your audience for making it happen. And I want to appeal to your audience to make sure it continues to happen by supporting Danny Dhaiphong.
Thanks so much, Scott. Yeah, no, it's been a great experience to connect. I think that's one of the things that people who are working toward peace, who want to see true peace, true justice, who want to see the United States be part of this world that is taking shape, that free of all of these endless wars from the United States' just outmoded leadership and system. I think one of the hardest things to do is oftentimes connect. And I believe, one of the ways that I try to run this show is through connecting with others. And, I know I've gotten some criticism at times for how I run my show, but really it is about connecting with as full of a spectrum as possible. Everyone, of course, it takes 2 or 3 more to tango. So sometimes it takes the other side responding with an affirmative. But yeah, this show is meant to bring voices together so we can create an ecosystem, and this is just one part of it. And yeah, the brunch was great. I know Operation Dawn is entering a new phase, and so all efforts to strengthen the movement for peace in this country is just absolutely critical to support. So appreciate all of that, and I know that we've certainly worked very hard. I know you're working very hard to continue this. So with all that said, everybody, Scott, if you have any final words, please give them. But we're going to head out right after his final words.
No, thank you very much. It's again an honor and privilege to be here, and we'll keep doing it. Look, whatever you think of the election, whatever outcome you were hoping for, and such, the next 4 years are going to be interesting years, and they're going to be years that require this kind of effort to bringing people together to try and work through the problems that are confronting the United States and the world, to better understand them, to better inform people. And we're in for a hell of a ride, guys, and it just makes the work that Danny and others are doing that much more important and that much more relevant. So, Danny, buckle in, buddy. We're going for a ride.
It's gonna be a bumpy ride indeed. Everybody, we are heading out together. So go to the video description, find Scott's website, find all the places to support this channel: Patreon, Substack, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and more. Hit the like button before you go. Subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you again soon. Likely in the afternoon. So take care. New York Eastern time. So hopefully it's convenient for some of you folks who are out further away from this United States. All right. Take care, everyone. Good night.